Well, good morning, Compass North Richland Hills. How are we doing? Okay, you're doing all right. That's fine. That's fine, man. Before we get started, can we give it up for Jo, who is one of my favorite people here in North Richland Hills? She is an awesome host. And a big thank you to those of you that, if you checked in on social media this morning, especially those of you who checked in on MySpace. You guys are legendary for doing that. You're still hanging on to things of the past. That's okay. We're going to talk about that a little bit this morning. My name is Rory, and I am the Rooted Pastor here at Compass. So that thing that you just heard Drew talking about is our 11-week discipleship experience here at Compass. And it's our primary way to help people grow in their faith, to have a more meaningful relationship with Jesus. But it's also our primary way to get people connected here. So if you're new and you're going, man, I just really want to find friends. I want to get connected. I want to know people that are similar to me. Rooted is the best way to do that. So my hope is that you would sign up to be a part of this session. They didn't send me here just to guilt trip you into signing up for Rooted, though. We are going to continue on in this series called Letters from My Future Self. And last week, Luke teed us up beautifully, talking about what it means to be people who don't worry. If we could look backwards or maybe look forward in time to remind ourselves of the meaningful wisdom that worry is not our friend. The worry is not there to help us, but worry actually can take us away from the life and the promises that God has for us. Well, today we're going to go into something a little bit deeper, because we all love a message titled "Don't Worry." Am I right? We all love to be reminded that God is in control, that God's got this, that we can relax and take a deep breath. But today I want to suggest that if you were to write a letter from your future self, you might suggest that you would forgive more. Please forgive, that you would forgive more than you ever have, even at this point in life. Now, forgiveness is one of those difficult topics. So before we jump into it, I want to tell you guys a story. Have you ever had one of those moments of self-realization where you realize something about yourself that you didn't know, and maybe when you realize it, you kind of feel a little icky. You're like, I didn't know that this is who I was, but now I am. I wonder how many other people know this about me. I've had one of those moments this year, and one of the things I've learned about being married is that being married just supplies you with a second person to help you realize things about yourself, right? You all know this, the husbands that are quiet right now, I'm with you. I've had one of these moments recently, and my wife and I, we went out to dinner for a date night, and we're at one of our favorite Tex-Mex restaurants, and we've eaten way too much food. I'm practically in the booth in a food coma, and the waitress comes over and she gives us our bill. And I look at it, and it is a much larger bill than I thought I would ever spend on Mexican food, but that's okay. It's the Lord's food. You spend what you have to. And so I put my credit card in, and the waitress takes it. She comes back, and it is now my turn to decide how much of a tip to leave this person. Now, if you have worked in the food industry as a waiter or a waitress, the rest of this story is going to appall you, and I apologize for that. So I begin to fill out the bill, and I leave a $2 tip. Now, yes, it's a little funny. My wife is watching as I'm doing this, and she goes, "You can't possibly think that's acceptable to leave as a tip." And I said, "Well, it's $2. Isn't that $2 is just like the base amount for a tip, right? You just leave $2. And she is staring at me like, I can't believe I married you. And she says, "How long have you been leaving $2 tips?" And I was like, "My whole life. Everybody does it. That's what everyone does, right? They leave a $2 tip. It doesn't matter what the cost is. You just leave a $2 tip." And she goes, "You can't be serious. This can't be real." So she takes the bill from me, she fills it out, she leaves an appropriate tip. Now, this whole thing was problematic for a couple reasons. One, our bill deserved a significantly larger tip than $2. This is what your tithing and offering goes to, cheap pastor. So it deserved a significantly larger tip. It was also unhelpful because it was in that moment that my wife and I both realized that I'm cheap. I'm just cheap. That's all this really was about. I'm just cheap. Now, some of you can relate to that. Some of you are like, he's a pastor. He's supposed to be generous, which is true. We're walking out of the restaurant, and my wife, I'll never forget this. She looks over at me and she goes, talking about our finances, she goes, "I can't believe you would be so stingy with something you have been so blessed with. That hurts a little, right? That hurt a little. She goes, I can't believe you would hold back from someone with something that you have been so blessed with. Now, when we talk about forgiveness, we often don't think about it in terms of generosity, but I think forgiveness, much like some other things in our spiritual life, is deeply connected to generosity. And this is what I mean by that. Forgiveness comes because you've been forgiven, which means you have this responsibility to pour it out to those around you. Now, I want to look at a moment in the life of Jesus today where he speaks directly to the heart of us of what it means to be forgiving people. I believe that Jesus sees us as people who have said, I'm going to follow Jesus, as people who forgiveness is meant to flow so freely out of, that it would actually change the world around us. Now, I don't know what you carried in with you today. I don't know if you brought in hurt and offense or pain, but Jesus never looks at us and says, we are going to live a life that's perfect and beautiful and no one will ever harm us. Unfortunately, he doesn't say that. In fact, he sometimes says the opposite, that what we can be guaranteed about life is that we will have moments and encounters with people where we will be deeply, deeply hurt. But what changes Jesus people from the rest of the world is how we deal, how we respond to that hurt and to that pain for the rest of our lives, and we have to forgive. Now, here's the unfortunate reality when we're in a room with a bunch of people. Some of us in here have been holding on to pain for years. Some of us have been holding on to hurt for a long time. Some of you have been holding on to hurt since the early 2000s, when the Backstreet Boys were still a thing. Some of you are holding on to hurt from the 90s. I was only born halfway through the 90s, so that should say something about your hurt. Some of you have hurt from the 80s, from the 70s, from the 60s. I know this to be true because of my own life experience. How many of you have recently gone back to school shopping with your kids? You got them some new clothes, you got them taken care of, you got them some backpacks. Yeah, I remember this as a kid in middle school. My mom would take me back to school shopping and we would always go to the Gap. And I remember every time from about 6th to 8th grade, we would go, and I would always try to get my mom to buy one of those t-shirts for me that it was just like a Gap graphic t-shirt that said Gap, established 1969. Now, she would always say no. I would say, Mom, can I have this t-shirt? No, you can't have that t-shirt. Okay. I thought for a while it was just because I was a terrible kid. But come to find out, when I'm in 8th grade, because when you're in 8th grade, right, you become basically a fully functioning adult who can support yourself. So we go and we're going shopping and I say, I'm gonna figure out why I can't have this t-shirt. So we get there, I say, Mom, can I have this t-shirt? She says no, and I say, all right, I'm not moving, but I want an explanation. Why can't I have this t-shirt? 3 years in a row you've said no. And I can't make this up. She looks at me and she says, well, I was a junior in high school in 1969. And the seniors that year were really mean to me. So you can't have a t-shirt with the year 1969 on it. What? I can't have a t-shirt with a year on it because you're offended by it? Guys, here's the truth. That story may seem ridiculous. I promise it's true. But that's true for so many of us. We have hurt and pain that has lingered around for a really long time, and we just can't get rid of it. But I believe Jesus says this, we have to let it go. We are not created as humans to be people who carry stuff through life that weigh us down. We are not meant to carry unforgiveness and resentment and guilt and shame. I believe that we have to learn to become people who practice forgiveness maybe better than we practice anything else. So if you have a Bible, we're going to be in Matthew chapter 18. If you don't, we're going to have the scriptures up on the screen. But we're going to look at this story in the life of Jesus. The writer of the book of Matthew is a man, in fact, by the name of Matthew, and he was a tax collector for the Roman Empire. He worked for the IRS. And one day Jesus shows up and he says, I want you to quit your job and I want you to follow me. I want you to see what life here and now is really about. And so he does that. He quits it. He goes on this internship with Jesus. And the entire time that he's with him, he takes notes about miracles and conversations and sermons that Jesus gives. Also that it could be relayed later in history. And this is where we pick it up. Matthew chapter 18, verse 21. It says this: "Then Peter came to Jesus and asked, 'Lord, how many times shall I forgive my brother or sister who sins against me? Up to 7 times?' Jesus answered, 'I tell you, not 7 times, but 77 times.'" See, it's known throughout Jewish history that the rabbis and the teachers, they would actually discuss this question to exhaustion. How many times do you have to forgive someone until it's enough? Now, the Pharisees and the teachers at that time, they had come to the conclusion that you only need to forgive someone 3 times before you can wipe your hands with them. 3 times, 3 strikes, and then you're out. So Peter, he knows this. He's coming to Jesus and he says, "Jesus, how many times do I have to forgive someone? 7 times?" Peter knows he's raising the stakes because he's trying to look like one of those people who's more spiritual than someone else. Have you ever been a part of one of those conversations to figure out who's really the more spiritual person in the room? What I've come to learn about people who try to be more spiritual is that often the hardest part for them is figuring out how to actually live what Jesus wanted them to. Which is why this conversation is so interesting. Peter says, how many times do you want me to forgive? 7 times? Or 7 times, excuse me. And Jesus says, no, not 7 times. Some translations say that he says 77 times. Others say that he says 70 times 7 times. Which for those of you like me who aren't great at math, that's 490 times. Jesus says, I want you to forgive 490 times. Can you imagine having to forgive someone that many times? At some point, you would lose count. At some point, you would forget how many times you've ever even forgiven them. You're not going to stop and say, well, I've forgiven you 450 times, so 40 more times, and you're out. You would lose count, which I think is Jesus' point. He wants us to be people who forgive so freely that we don't even keep track. People who forgiveness flows so freely out of that we don't count how many times someone has wronged us. The point is that we would continue to forgive. Now, I know when you start a conversation about forgiveness, immediately we kind of do what Peter does. We want to know, well, how many times or what is forgiveness and what isn't it? Because if I can figure those things out, then I can put it into a form that I like, and then I know how to live this out. I'm not going to tell you what forgiveness is yet. That would ruin the sermon. You'd fall asleep. So I'm going to tell you what it isn't before we go any further. See, forgiveness isn't forgetting that something happened, contrary to what some people say, because you may need to forgive someone, but you may need to remember what happened so that you can set up healthy boundaries. Forgiveness isn't ignoring the consequences. You may need to forgive someone, but you may need to also call the police. It's not ignoring the consequences. Forgiveness, it's not condoning someone's actions. On the contrary, I think when you forgive someone, it actually shows them how much you disagree with what they've done, but that's not the point. The other thing I would say is that forgiveness is not contingent on someone acknowledging that they're wrong. I sat with a close friend of mine recently who has gone through some awful family trauma, and he looked at me and he said, I would forgive her if she would just say, I'm sorry. And so many of us think that way, man, I could forgive this person if they would just admit that they're the one that's messed up and not me. That's not what forgiveness is. Forgiveness isn't based on that, because I think Jesus wants us to go deeper than just easily forgiving someone, which is why he's about to tell us a story. He's going to tell us a parable, a story that's meant to carry some value or some meaning or a life lesson in it. Verse 23, he goes on, he says, therefore, the kingdom of heaven is like a king who wanted to settle accounts with his servants. As he began the settlement, a man who owed him 10,000 bags of gold was brought to him. Since he was not able to pay, the master ordered that he and his wife and his children and all that he had be sold to repay the debt. 10,000 bags of gold. We are talking about more than a lifetime's worth of wages. Why this man was allowed to have that much money in the first place, we will never know. but it's more money than he could ever pay back, which is why this story in the Bible quickly turns into like a mob movie. He's getting taken, his kids are getting taken, his wife is getting taken. Everything that he has is being taken away from him. This debt that he owes cannot be repaid. For some of you, when you think about people who have wronged you and that you can't forgive, that's what jumps in your head. Well, maybe I could forgive them, but the debt, it can't really be repaid. The story goes on. Verse 26. At this, the servant fell on his knees before him. Be patient with me, he begged, and I will pay back everything. The servant's master took pity on him, canceled the debt, and let him go. This servant, he comes to this guy, to his master, and he falls on his knees. He says, give me another chance. Just give me another shot. I can't repay this. I don't know how I'm going to, but if you take everything from me, I will be destroyed. Please don't hold this against me. And the master so painlessly says, okay. He responds with grace. He cancels all of the debt that this man owes and lets him go. That to me is what forgiveness is. It's the willingness to let someone go free. The willingness to release someone and say, you are not mine. I am not in control, but you can go free. Forgiveness is the willingness to let someone go free. So we have to watch what this servant does with this newfound freedom. Verse 28, it says, but when that servant went out, he found one of his fellow servants who owed him 100 silver coins, not even close to the amount that he owed. He grabbed him and began to choke him. Pay back what you owe me, he demanded. Someone ever owed you so much money you just want to choke him? Someone said, yep. His fellow servant fell to his knees and begged him, be patient with me and I will pay it back. But he refused. Instead, he went off and had the man thrown into prison until he could pay the debt. When the other servants saw what had happened, they were outraged and went and told their master everything that had happened. Then the master called the servant in. You wicked servant, he said, I canceled all that debt of yours because you begged me to. Shouldn't you have had mercy on your fellow servant, just as I had on you? Now, as we talk about forgiveness, as we kind of wrap this up slowly, I have a couple thoughts that I want to share with you. But here's the deal. If we want to have a growing, vibrant, meaningful relationship with God and a life that matters here and now, there's nothing more like Jesus than forgiveness. There's nothing more like Jesus than forgiveness. Some of us wonder why our relationship with God has fallen short or it's become slow, and it's because we have so much anger and resentment built up that we can't move forward. But we have to become people who live out Jesus's understanding of forgiveness. And I think it looks like this. It starts with this. The first thought I have for you. We have to drop the perfection game. Now listen, I'm not here today because I want to give you a sermon that makes you feel like you got punched in the throat and then you went home and had lunch. I just want you to realize that a lack of forgiveness starts when we can't put ourselves in the shoes of the person who's wronged us. A lack of forgiveness starts when we can't put ourselves in their shoes. Right? We can justify anything if we think and we sit on it long and hard enough. And we can easily justify unforgiveness if we convince ourselves of how perfect we are. We say things like, I just can't believe they would do that to me. I can't believe they would say that. I can't believe that they would think that that is okay. But let's be honest. We both know that you're not perfect, that I'm not perfect, that we carry these massive imperfections. The scriptures put it this way, Ecclesiastes chapter 7, verse 20, which is this entire book about wisdom. It says, indeed, there is no one on earth who is righteous, no one who does what is right and never sins. Do not pay attention to every word people say, or you may hear your servant cursing you. For you know in your heart that many times you have cursed others. You're not perfect. None of us are perfect. Remember all the times that you've messed up. Even thinking back to when you were a kid, the times that you lied and got caught. The times that you insulted someone, that you gossiped behind their back. Or maybe as an adult, the time that that you were rude or mean to your spouse. The time that you were someone you don't want to remember. The time that you didn't follow through on a commitment. The time that you were a little loose with how you handled your company's money. See, we all have those moments, but here's the deal. If we replay them as if it's someone else's story, we immediately become judgmental. We immediately become shut off. We say, man, I would never do that. But none of us are perfect. It's so easy not to forgive if we forget how flawed we really are. But the beautiful thing is that in our weakness, in our brokenness, in our flaws, in our sin, in our mistakes, God reaches out to us and offers us forgiveness. And he offers it freely to us, which is why my second thought is this, because forgiveness isn't about who's worthy or who's not worthy. We forgive because we've been forgiven. We forgive because we've been forgiven. The book of Colossians says this: make allowance for each other's faults and forgive anyone who offends you. Remember, the Lord forgave you, so you must forgive others. I love that. Remember, the Lord forgave you, so you must forgive others. You must forgive because you've been forgiven. Now hear me. You don't forgive because you're a nice person. I'm a nice person, but I don't love to forgive people that have hurt me. You don't forgive because you have to. You don't forgive because God wants you to. No, it says forgive because of what you have already experienced in life. Forgive because you've been forgiven. Forgive because of the freedom that you already have. This goes back to what my wife said walking out of that restaurant. I can't believe you would be so stingy, so selfish, so cheap with something that you have been so blessed with. How could you not be generous with a tip? I think the same question applies for us. How could we not forgive someone else? When we think about the way that the world has worked, some of us withhold forgiveness like God has never forgiven us. Like we've forgotten that God has forgiven us, right? Jesus, it says these words about Jesus: he will remove our sin and our brokenness as far as the east is from the west. And while none of us are Jesus, some of us act like we don't know how a GPS works at all. We don't know how far east is from west. We don't know that God has cleared the slate for us. And because he's done that, it is our duty, our responsibility, our hope that we could do the same for others. See, you forgive because you've been forgiven. You've been blessed by a loving God who, even in your worst, darkest moments, reached out and invited you into his family. Why wouldn't you extend that to someone else? Why wouldn't you reach out and offer that to them as well? See, one of the questions we have to ask, because Jesus says we will be hurt, we will be insulted, we will have pain caused towards us. One of the questions that we have to ask is, how do we stop from becoming offended? How do we stop from looking at Facebook and becoming offended? How do we stop from hearing someone make a slick comment and getting worked up and having it ruin our day? I love the first part of this verse, the beginning of verse 13. It says, make allowance for each other's faults. Make allowance for each other's faults. In other words, keep some forgiveness in your back pocket. Just keep some forgiveness there. If you keep forgiveness in your back pocket, guess what? The next time someone hurts you or harms you or offends you, you've already got it. You're already ready to forgive them. See, because the truth is, because you've been forgiven by God, you have to forgive people before they ever even hurt you. Before they ever even hurt you. Because see, the truth is, some of you are so surprised that you keep getting hurt by people. You don't understand it. How imperfect people could cause you so much pain. I'll tell you why. Because they're people. You're hurt because people are just being themselves. A friend of mine by the name of Ryan Leake, he says it this way. He says, we have to expect people to be stupid. Expect people to be stupid. and keep some forgiveness in your back pocket. Why are you so shocked that people keep offending you, that you keep being hurt? Keep some forgiveness. If you keep some forgiveness in your back pocket, man, life can change. Now you can go to work and deal with that coworker. You know it's Monday. They're already going to say something to you. I've got some forgiveness right here. I'm ready to go. You can deal with your spouse when they forget to pick up the kids from school and then send them back to pick the kids up, but you still got forgiveness ready for them. When that family member calls and just makes you so mad, you can just go, I've got some forgiveness right here. You make allowance for it. You say, I'm not just gonna try and forgive when something goes wrong. No, I'm gonna be ready to forgive on the spot before people ever hurt me. And you're not gonna do it because you're a good person, because you even want to. You're not gonna do it because they deserve it. You're gonna do it because you didn't deserve it. You're gonna do it because in your darkest moments, God reached out and forgave you with everything that he had. How could you not forgive someone else? What I wanna do as we wrap up today is speak to maybe the elephant that sits in the room when we talk about forgiveness. You know, if we're talking about writing a letter from our future self, that person knows the things that are gonna hurt us, knows the little things, the little frustrations, the coworkers, the bosses, the stuff that wears us down. But what about the big stuff? See, I know that some of you might be sitting here and go, man, talking about forgiveness is great. It's so good. I'm so glad that Jesus has forgiven me. That's awesome. But you don't know what I've been through. You don't know the hurt. You don't know the pain. You don't know the stuff that I have experienced. And you're right, I have no idea. But the big stuff, the abuse, the violence, the hurt, the bosses that have ruined your job, the destruction that has happened to you, all of that stuff can be forgiven. I'm here today to tell you that it can be forgiven. See, I believe that forgiveness is this long, grueling journey. And here's my point. Whatever that big hurt is, you have to be willing to let it go. An emphasis on be willing to let it go. Proverbs 17, verse 9, it says this: whoever would foster love covers an offense, but whoever repeats the matter separates close friends. Now, when it says whoever repeats the matter, it isn't talking about whoever does the same thing, whoever repeats the offense. It's actually saying whoever dwells on the wrong, whoever refuses to let it go, whoever wastes time, whoever wastes life on the thing that has been done to them. See, the question isn't can you forgive someone? The question is, are you even willing to forgive someone? See, I said earlier that I think forgiveness is the willingness to let someone go free, and I believe that to be true. But I think the definition is a little bit fuller than that. I would say this: I would say that forgiveness is the willingness to let someone go free and then finding out it was you. See, I think we believe that when we hold on to hurt, when we hold on to offense, when we hold on to resentment, that we are actually hurting the person who's hurt us. But if we're really honest with ourselves, that's not true. We know that person has no idea what we're feeling, right? The film reel that we keep playing over and over of the offense in our head, no one sees that but us. The feelings, the emotions, the pain that we think by holding on to we're hurting someone, only we feel those things. If you don't hear anything today, it says the person that has offended you, that you are holding on to that pain from, that person is massively unaware of what you are going through. They have no idea. They are not considering what has happened to you, what has made you hurt. See, forgiveness is the willingness to let someone go free and then to find out it was you. Let's check out this video.
My name is Derek Hess, and I've been going to Compass now it'll be 3 years in September. And I definitely haven't always been a Christian. I was actually in prison for 6 years for selling drugs and doing a bunch of bad things. And
My name is Tiffany Glisson. I've been coming to Compass on and off for about a year. I work in the criminal justice system, and I've worked in the criminal justice system for years.
I got out in September of 2013, and I was just ready to find a church that would really accept me and that I could get that connection with God that I had in there. And my sister has attended Compass for a while, and this was the first place on my list. And I came here and I talked to the pastor, Drew, and they just welcomed me with open arms. And through the experience, I really felt like I needed to get more involved, like I really needed to get more of a connection with the community and the people in the church. And we started hearing about Rooted, and it was something that we really wanted to do. I didn't really know exactly what was going to transpire at Rooted, but I just knew that it was my next step to really get involved in the church.
Even though I had everything that I wanted, I had my family, I had my career, I felt like something was missing. We felt like Compass was the place that we really needed to be, and we started to become more involved in the church and come every Sunday. And that's also when I heard about Rooted.
During the first week of Rooted, we really knew that it was the group that God had intended for us. Also in my group was a woman who was kind of on the other side of the tracks from me. We gave our testimonies, and here I was, an ex-felon with 5 felonies on my record and all these bad things that I had done in the past, and I'm sharing it with the group. And she happens to be a district attorney for the city of Arlington who's kind of on the other side of the fence dealing with people like I used to be all the time. And it was just awesome to see how God kind of weaved us all together and used our testimonies to kind of let us see the other side of things.
And then Derek was in our group. And when we first met, as we went through Rooted and we were discussing the scriptures and the different things, it was clear that Derek was a man of faith. It was clear that he lived a Christian life and that he truly knew God's word and believed in it. And then I heard Derek's story. And at one time, Derek lived the life that I despised. I looked at criminal histories daily, and that's how I judged people. I would look at their criminal history, and to me, I knew the person. And I knew what kind of person that they were because I knew the things that they did. And to hear about his past, to hear that at one time he had been involved in that, it was just shocking to me. But it also helped me see my short-sightedness and see where I was being judgmental of others. And it really helped me understand that we are all sinners. And he had a different walk, but ultimately he had found Christ.
At the last week of the Rooted celebration, it was a shock to me that I didn't even realize that she was going to get baptized. And whenever they had the baptisms at the end, she walked up to baptize and do the visual representation of being buried with Christ and rising up in new life.
And so at the Rooted celebration, I decided to be rebaptized. And I say rebaptized, but I think it was really my first true baptism where I truly understood the commitment that I was making to live a Christian life. So they told us that, if pick someone in your group to baptize you. It didn't have to be one of the pastors. And so I picked Derek.
To have the opportunity to baptize her and the significance of that, I don't take that lightly at all. And it was just an amazing experience. I teared up. It was awesome.
Hearing Derek's story and getting to know him and then hearing his story, it really helped me see that we all have sins of the past. And we've all made bad decisions and bad choices. But it's not that one event, one crime, one anything that defines us other than whether or not we are living with Christ. That is the one thing that defines us, I think. That is the only thing that matters.
I love what she says towards the end of that video, she says, we all have sins of the past. We've all made bad decisions and bad choices, but it's not that one event that defines us. See, what I would ask you to consider today are, where are the moments in the past where someone has hurt you, someone has sinned against you, and you just haven't let it go? Maybe justifiably so. Maybe it was so hurtful, so painful that you don't know how to let it go. What I would say is that this week could be a life-changing week for you. That you could call the person who has hurt you and say, I know you probably won't ask for it. I don't need you to admit you were wrong, but I forgive you. I mean, if we really want to live like people who follow Jesus with everything, we have to learn how to forgive people before we are ever even hurt. This week, maybe you would make some phone calls, you would set up some coffees with people and say, man, I have held something against you for 5 years, 10 years, 30 years, whatever. And I forgive you. See, forgiveness is the willingness to let someone go free, but more times than not, we are the ones who are in captivity because of it. Because of our choice to not forgive someone, we have put ourselves in bondage. And not only do we need to let them go free, but Jesus is begging us to let ourselves go. Would you pray with me this morning? God, we are so thankful to be able to gather as a family and talk about life and talk about who you are and what you have done for us. God, my prayer and my hope today is that no one in this room would let forgiveness or a lack of forgiveness rob them of the future and the calling and the plan that you have for their life. God, that you would remind us that because you have forgiven us so immensely through the life and death and resurrection of Jesus, that we have this calling, this responsibility to forgive people like crazy. God, that you have invited us to be people who forgive so counterculturally that people don't even understand it. That mercy and forgiveness flow so deeply through us that the rest of the world is changed. God, for the person in here who has been so wronged, who the idea of forgiving this person hurts them so bad, God, I ask that you would bring them peace, but also that you would bring them hope. Because when we forgive, we look like the Father. God, we ask that you would remind us that we have to be willing to step into that life. God, remind us of our own flaws. God, give us empathy for those who have hurt us. God, we trust you with all of this, knowing that even in the hardest things, you can show up and do the most beautiful work.